They said this chemo would save her life, but when the first round hardly made her nauseous, we knew something was terribly off. These haunting words come from a distraught husband in a low-income country, devastated to learn that the medicine he believed would be his wife's chance at recovery may have contained only a fragment of the active ingredient required to fight her illness. Imagine the shock, the betrayal, and the sorrow that come from pinning all hopes on a treatment, only to discover that it might be nothing more than an empty promise in a plastic bag. Today we are digging into a harrowing story that spans continents and affects patients in over 100 countries. At its core lies a monumental healthcare crisis: the invasion of generic cancer drugs that do not meet quality standards, possibly endangering lives across the globe. How did this crisis begin? Why is no one catching these flawed medications before they reach desperate patients? And is there any hope for a system that seems so broken from top to bottom? In this episode, we will peel away the layers of secrecy and confusion to reveal what is truly happening with these vital chemotherapies and why so many people are growing alarmed. Stay with us as we explore everything from manufacturing shortcuts to the heartbreaking impact on the poorest communities. Then decide for yourself whether you believe the medical safety nets are genuinely protecting us or leaving us more vulnerable than we ever imagined. Over the course of this deep dive, we will uncover the corporate slang that drives production costs down, while quality checks slip through the cracks, the stark reality of doctors forced to guess whether their cancer treatment is legitimate, and the labyrinth of regulatory agencies that do not always see eye to eye on how to keep patients safe. By the end, you will know how a market driven almost entirely by cost can push certain manufacturers to cut corners, and how that can translate into a terrifying game of chance for patients on the brink of medical disaster. Are we witnessing a silent global epidemic of substandard chemotherapy? Let us set the stage. Picture a modest hospital in a resource-limited region of Africa. Outside, the midday sun cooks the ground, and inside, anxious families sit in cramped waiting areas hoping to see a specialist. Among them is a mother clutching the hand of her young daughter, who was just diagnosed with a vicious form of leukemia. Their physician recommended a round of potent generic chemotherapy, thought to be as effective as more expensive brands. For a while, the mother was relieved. Generic medications are frequently her only option, and they are well known for making treatment more accessible to families of modest means. But what she could not know was that some supplies of the very drug they were counting on were flagged in another part of the country for having dangerously low amounts of active ingredient. Yet, no public alert was raised, and no official recall was issued. The mother, trusting in her doctor's prescription, had no inkling that her child might be ingesting a medication that many pharmacists would consider utterly useless. Stories like this showcase the human cost behind the numbers. Researchers investigating the quality of major generic chemotherapy agents discovered that some were so weak they might as well have been placebos, containing less than half the labeled dose. At the other extreme, a portion of these medications proved to be overdosed, crammed with so much active pharmaceutical compound that experts warned they could unleash nausea, organ damage, or even fatal toxicity. It almost defies comprehension. One blister pack can have multiple pills, each with a different potency, all hidden behind a uniform label. When news first broke regarding these alarming test results, many people, especially those in high-income nations, felt relieved that such flawed drugs might never reach their own pharmacies. But that sense of security turned out to be short-lived. Evidence soon arose that a host of countries, from wealthy nations to those that struggle to fund even basic health care, had imported these questionable batches. Before proceeding to aspects of global oversight, let us momentarily focus on the real heartbreak: a patient with ovarian cancer in sub-Saharan Africa who responded well to initial treatments. Suddenly, with a new batch of medicine, she experienced zero side effects and no reduction in her tumor burden. Alarmed, her oncologist began to suspect that this fresh supply might not contain enough active ingredient to do its job, but he had no easy way to verify the drug's quality. Even though national regulators exist, many do not have the resources or testing facilities needed to confirm whether a batch is genuine. If a local hospital or pharmacy wants to check the authenticity of its stock, it may have to send samples abroad or simply trust certificates that may or may not be legitimate. If this news astonishes you, consider giving a quick thumbs up so more people realize how dire this situation is. The more awareness we raise, the more we can shine a light on the places and protocols that have allowed substandard treatments to go unchallenged. Because for many families, this is about more than a supply chain glitch. It is literally life and death. Let us shift gears into the matter of manufacturing. Generic drug makers are planet-wide, but a large percentage of the substandard chemotherapy uncovered by investigators came primarily from factories in India. This is no surprise, since India is the top producer of generic medicines for countless diseases, from malaria to diabetes and cancer. Generally, these drugs cost less compared to brand-name versions because they skip the massive research and development budgets that pioneer pharmaceuticals usually bear. Generics are a vital lifeline, particularly in areas where patients can barely afford any healthcare whatsoever. But with success sometimes comes vulnerability. In a marketplace overshadowed by cost competition, unscrupulous factories may try to stretch their profits by tamping down the concentration of expensive active ingredients. One might wonder, do regulators not catch these discrepancies before the drugs go out to hospitals? The short answer is that they often do not. Even in countries with robust watchdog agencies, inspectors sometimes encounter false paperwork, superficial compliance, or limited time to conduct in-depth audits. Think about it this way. To ensure a chemotherapy injection has precisely the right chemical composition, it is not enough to do a spot check once a year. Frequent rigorous testing of each batch is required. Unfortunately, some regulatory bodies do not have the manpower, the technology, or the funding for repeated and unannounced inspections. In certain instances, factories carefully choreograph what visiting inspectors see, sometimes delaying or outright hiding incriminating data until after the inspectors leave. Now imagine the ripple effect across the globe. Hospitals in high-income countries might have some degree of protection if they check certifications or require advanced performance data from suppliers. But the cracks start to appear in middle and low-income settings, where tracking the supply chain is exceedingly difficult. Representatives from clinics in impoverished regions frequently rely on donated shipments or the lowest-priced options. They have neither the luxury to demand comprehensive lab results nor the chance to switch manufacturers if something suspicious emerges. Consequently, entire patient populations can become virtual testing grounds for these questionable formulations, some of which may offer minimal or no therapeutic benefit. But what about official agencies like the World Health Organization? Surely they can intervene. The reality, however, is more complex. The World Health Organization does maintain a roster of what it calls essential medicines, intended to guide member countries in selecting which treatments should be prioritized. Yet the list alone does not guarantee that the version of the drug purchased in a specific country meets any rigorous international standard in actual practice. The organization also administers programs designed to pre-qualify drugs and manufacturing sites that pass certain criteria, but these programs do not necessarily include every form of chemotherapy, nor every generic manufacturer. Some producers have found ways around official processes, presenting certifications from overseas, or leaning on middlemen to expedite enormous overseas shipments. Even if a suspicious batch is flagged, countries vary greatly in how they respond. Some regulators are quick to impose recalls or seize stock, but many are not. One nation, for instance, might discover a substandard consignment, confiscate it, and sound an alarm. Yet that same batch, passing unnoticed in another jurisdiction, might continue to be sold in pharmacies and used on unsuspecting patients. Consider the case of a father from an Asian country whose 4-year-old son was diagnosed with leukemia. The father took his child to the capital's primary cancer treatment center, only to realize the family needed to purchase the chemotherapy from a private pharmacy. The pharmacist sold him a generic package that, ironically, was far from cheap. The father, scraping together whatever money he could, assumed the medicine had official backing. When weeks of therapy yielded none of the toxicity or mild side effects that are typically expected with this treatment, the father began to worry that something was amiss. Meanwhile, the child's blood counts and tumor progression remained frustratingly unchanged. By the time the family realized the drug might be compromised, they had no more savings left to attempt another brand. This story, sadly, is not an isolated case. Low or middle-income countries often carry an unequal burden in paying out of pocket for cancer treatments, even though one might assume that growing economies are bridging these gaps. The stark truth is that many nations' social and public insurance systems cover only a fraction of expenses. This leaves individuals with crippling debts or impossible cost barriers, and in some situations, they end up paying a steep price for a drug that is not even properly formulated. It is a cruel paradox, forcing patients to pay, sometimes for months or even years, for a product that can ultimately do more harm than good. What inflames the tension further is that numerous of these substandard drugs do not always fail outright lab tests. Some only show borderline anomalies that might elude inspectors. Others degrade under poor shipping or storage conditions. Imagine a cargo container left in sweltering heat for days, drastically diminishing a drug's potency. Manufacturers sometimes blame unstable shipping processes, while shipping companies might point fingers back at the producers for not including advanced temperature controls or tamper-proof packaging. Meanwhile, the patient caught in the crossfire is left with a potentially compromised dose. Also, alarming is the possibility of extreme overdosing. Overdosed medication is just as perilous as underdosed medication, perhaps even more so in certain contexts. One specialized cancer pharmacist shared a story of a teenage lymphoma patient who started experiencing unbelievably intense side effects after receiving a batch of generic chemotherapy. Tablets tested at a local lab were discovered to contain nearly 30% more of the active compound than labeled. This discrepancy might not sound too dramatic until one realizes that dosage calculations for chemotherapy can be extremely precise, balancing on the narrow ledge between harm and benefit. An extra 15 or 20% can cause massive havoc in a patient's system. The teenager, beset by unstoppable vomiting and plunging blood counts, nearly ended up in intensive care. Though he survived, he might have faced kidney or liver complications for the rest of his life due to that single dosage miscalculation. To unravel how things have deteriorated so badly, it is helpful to look at the economics of the generic pharmaceuticals market. Because cost drives everything, buyers with limited budgets often choose the cheapest supplier, no matter how suspiciously that price might undercut the global average. Unethical companies, seeing an opportunity, may either slash production costs by using subpar ingredients or skip key steps in quality control so they can keep prices unnaturally low. This sets off a race to the bottom, which is further compounded by fierce competition and price squeezing from the highest levels of global procurement agencies. Ironically, the pharmaceutical system that was supposed to make life-saving treatments accessible is also susceptible to some of the worst exploitation. One might then wonder, do these stories of substandard drugs mostly surface in remote clinics? The disturbing reality is that even certain well-funded hospitals in developed countries occasionally find themselves grappling with supply shortfalls. When a prime supplier is temporarily shut down for quality infractions, hospitals are left scrambling. They might have to switch to a less scrutinized importer, inadvertently opening the door to substandard shipments. This can create a wave of drug shortages, sometimes leading to delayed or canceled treatment cycles for cancer patients who cannot afford to miss even a single round of therapy. But there is a glint of hope in the darkness. Some medical professionals and independent researchers are working tirelessly to test and expose flawed drugs. In certain local universities, chemistry programs are developing cheaper field kits that allow pharmacists to analyze suspicious pills more immediately, saving precious days that would otherwise be spent shipping samples to distant labs. In addition, a handful of global organizations have begun offering training to regulators in countries with historically weak oversight. The message is clear: nobody should be left unarmed against the threat of substandard medication. And as more attention is garnered, some governments are feeling the heat to go after dishonest manufacturers with harsher legal action. Every so often, this leads to a dramatic crackdown. Investigators show up unannounced at a manufacturing plant, rummaging through production logs, analyzing waste disposal, or checking for the presence of counterfeit labels. At times, they find employees destroying or masking data right in front of them. In rare but sensational instances, entire factories have been shuttered amid criminal charges. Yet even then, the labyrinth of the global supply chain allows questionable stock to be rerouted or repackaged under a different brand name, culminating in a game of whack-a-mole that can last for years. Now, you might be thinking, is there anything I can do about this, or is it all in the hands of large institutions? If you appreciate these insights and want to help spread the word, please consider subscribing for future deep dives. Each new subscription helps raise awareness and encourages more people to demand better safeguards. Looking ahead, the conversation around generic cancer drugs is bound to intensify. Some argue that we need universal enforcement of random testing, funded and overseen by a global scientific body with the power to standardize processes and penalize offenders. Others believe that the key is in transparency. If every batch's test results were made publicly available, then unscrupulous companies might be deterred from shipping substandard products. Advocates for radical reform see digital tools, such as blockchain-based tracking, eliminating the secrecy that currently shrouds so many factories. The question, however, remains: who pays for these improvements? Many low-income nations are already pushed to the brink, with meager health budgets that hardly cover staff salaries, let alone advanced technology for monitoring drug supply chains. On the more pragmatic side, a few clinicians say that while generics are undeniably beneficial, the entire process, from raw materials to final packaging, must be open to greater inspection. They stress that generic formulations are not necessarily inferior. The real issue lies with the lack of accountability for those outliers who break the rules. In the pursuit of solutions, it is not about demonizing the entire generic drug industry, which has undoubtedly contributed to saving millions of lives. Instead, the goal is to implement safety nets that actually work. After all, there is little use in an elaborate set of guidelines if they are ignored at the practical level. One major lesson from these revelations is that a national drug regulator is only as strong as its resources allow it to be. Investigating and testing just a handful of batches per year, while thousands circulate freely, translates to massive blind spots. Some smaller countries even rely almost entirely on imported expertise, foreign labs that confirm or deny a batch's safety. This process can be so time-consuming that by the time results return, the questionable shipment might have already been distributed to pharmacies. We also cannot forget that failing to address this crisis may increase disparities within healthcare. The wealthy can afford either brand-name alternatives or specialized testing if they suspect a drug's quality, but those with limited means are simply stuck with whatever arrives in local clinics, even if it is dangerously flawed. Think about the heartbreak of an entire family liquidating their life savings for a last shot at beating breast cancer, only to discover down the road that the medicine itself was inadequate, wasted opportunities, and wasted funds, possibly costing a life. Equally distressing is the worry that some of these patients, who receive partial or inconsistent doses, may develop drug resistance or precarious side effects, hampering future treatments. While official data on these outcomes is scant, anecdotal evidence from medical practitioners worldwide points to a worrying rise in unexplained complications. One doctor recounted how patients who initially showed strong responses to therapy suddenly became unresponsive, forcing them to switch to second or third-line treatments that might be less accessible or more expensive. In the face of such a complex problem, it can be tempting to lay responsibility solely on manufacturers. Without a doubt, every company that decides to compromise on quality in pursuit of higher margins is betraying the trust of the patients and healthcare systems they claim to serve. But the blame can extend wider. Government agencies that set procurement rules may overly emphasize price at the expense of thorough vetting procedures. Health ministries that do not follow up on suspicious product complaints or fail to recall known bad batches likewise share the responsibility. And missed inspections, insufficient funding, or conflicting regulations all contribute to a system that allows these harmful practices to continue. Small victories do exist, such as the occasional success story of hospital pharmacists who refuse to use suspicious medicines, raising the alarm early and preventing a wider crisis. Or the local organizations that scramble to fund independent quality tests, shining a bright light on some of the most blatant violators. In the long run, though, the greatest victory will come from structural, systemic change. That means creating a genuine culture of accountability, where producers that stray from the rules are not just fined, but barred from the market, where official labs are not just symbolic, but equipped and trained to analyze any suspicious consignment thoroughly, and where project after project invests in uplifting regulators, ensuring they can keep pace with modern pharmaceutical technology. We stand at a pivotal moment. If left unaddressed, the crisis of substandard generic cancer drugs could well become the next scandal overshadowing global health, scarring families across continents. Yet if tackled head-on, it could serve as a blueprint for improved oversight, more reliable medicine supplies, and renewed confidence in the principle that treatment should do what it promises to do: cure the sick, give hope to the afflicted, and relieve suffering. Whether you are in a bustling metropolis or a rural community, this issue ties into the broader question of how we, as a global society, are valuing human life. Are we willing to demand that corporate gains never trump patient well-being? Are we prepared to fund and fortify regulatory systems so that no family has to experience the nightmare of a wasted chance at treatment when time is running short? Thank you for staying with us through this crucial exploration. These challenges might feel overwhelming, but paying attention and sharing knowledge is the first step toward catalyzing positive change. If you feel that more people should be aware of this urgent problem, do not hesitate to share this story. Across the world, cancer remains a formidable foe, taking the lives of millions each year. For many, chemotherapy stands as the only line of defense, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Yet that hope can be shattered if the medication itself is compromised, turning an already harrowing struggle into a tragic betrayal. Time and again, we see that vigilance, both from official bodies and from empowered communities, can expose the grim truth behind substandard formulations. Ultimately, the fight to protect patients from ineffective or dangerous chemotherapy is about more than metrics or procurement rules. It is a moral imperative. Fight for it. Ask tough questions. Demand accountability from the companies that produce and distribute these drugs. Our journey is not over. In fact, it is only beginning. New revelations may emerge, laboratories will keep testing, families will keep speaking out, and a spotlight will remain on the safety nets that should be, and perhaps are not, catching the worst offenders. As for us, we will continue investigating these survival stories, these heartbreaks, and these flickers of hope that define the current era of cancer treatment. Because every person, no matter where they are born or how much they earn, deserves a real chance at healing, not a counterfeit dream masked as medicine. With more collective awareness, more strategic reforms, and a refusal to accept any half measures, we can insist that every manufacturer, every regulatory body, and every health official hold themselves to the highest standard. No one should ever be forced to wonder whether a potentially life-saving chemotherapy vial might be a lie in a plastic wrapper. Let this stand as a call for real action, real science, and real responsibility. A future in which the phrase substandard chemotherapy is consigned to the darkest chapters of medical history is within reach if we do not look away from the facts. But to get there, we must be unwavering in our scrutiny and tireless in our demands for genuine accountability. Thus ends our gripping exploration into the troubling world of questionable cancer drugs. Whether your connection to cancer is personal or distant, these developments concern us all because healthcare, at its core, is about trust. And without trust, how can any medical intervention truly bring the healing and hope patients deserve?